What if Robb Stark crowned Jon Snow? Not instead of himself. Not instead of fighting. Robb was going to fight regardless. His father was dead, his sisters were hostages, and Robb Stark at 16 with his father's sword and his father's name and 50,000 men at his back was not a man who was going to sit in Winterfell and write polite letters south. But what if, in the hours before the declaration, someone told Robb the truth? Not most of it. Not Rhaegar Targaryen and the Tower of Joy, and all the weight of what Jon actually was. Just the essential part. Your father lied. Jon is not a bastard. Jon is the secret your father died protecting. Jon's claim makes yours look like ambition. What if Robb Stark, who was his father's son in every way that mattered, meaning he would always choose the harder right over the comfortable wrong, looked at the crown they were about to put on his head and said, "Not mine. His." This is not a story about Jon Snow accepting power gracefully. He didn't. He shouted. He refused. He walked out of the room twice. He came back once because Robb wouldn't let it go, and once because the alternative was watching Robb die for a war. Jon could end without a crown. He put it on. He hated every moment of it. And then he was king. And then the real trouble started. The Riverlands. Robb's camp, 298 AC, 3 days before the Lords declared. Robb had been awake for most of the night, which was becoming a habit, sitting with the maps and the supply numbers and the ledger of what the war would actually cost versus what they had. 50,000 men eat. 50,000 men need boots replaced and swords sharpened and horses reshod. 50,000 men have families they left behind, and they are loyal right now, in the flush of outrage and grief. But outrage and grief are not infinite resources. He'd been thinking about that when Howland Reed arrived. Not expected, not announced. One of his men came to the tent and said there was a Lord of the Crannogman who said he needed to speak to Lord Stark alone, that it was about Lord Eddard, that it was urgent in a way that required the word urgent to carry more than its usual weight. Robb almost sent him away. He was tired, and he had a war to run. Something in the phrasing stopped him. About Lord Eddard. He let him in. Howland Reed was a small man who moved with the watchful quiet of someone who had spent his life in terrain where making noise got you killed. He sat across from Robb and looked at him for a moment. Just looked. The way you look at someone when you're deciding something. Then, "Your father saved my life at Hardhome. Before the rebellion. I've never told this to anyone because he asked me not to. He made me swear." "He's dead," Robb said. "I know." A pause. "He would have told you eventually." "I think he would have. He was getting there." "Tell me what?" So Howland told him. Robb didn't move. He sat with both hands flat on the table, and he listened and he didn't speak until Howland was finished, and even then he sat for another long minute looking at the grain of the wood. "Jon," he said finally, "Jon Snow is Lyanna Stark's son. He is Aegon Targaryen by blood and right, and the reason your father spent 15 years lying to everyone he loved." Howland looked at his hands. "I'm sorry it comes like this." Robb wasn't sorry. He was furious. Not at Howland, not at Jon, not even entirely at his father, but at the shape of it, the way the thing had been managed, the way his father had carried it alone for 15 years rather than what? Trusted his son with it. His son who was 6 when the lie started, who was 10, who was 12. He wasn't angry at his father. He understood why. That was the worst part. He understood exactly why, and he would have done the same thing, and it hadn't saved Ned Stark at all. He said, "The Lords meet in 2 days. They're going to declare me king." Howland nodded. "Jon's claim supersedes mine." By any traditional reading, yes. Robb was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Howland got up and poured 2 cups from the jug on the sideboard and set one in front of Robb without being asked. Robb didn't touch it. "Go to bed," he said. "Don't talk to anyone tonight. Tomorrow morning we do this properly." "What does properly look like?" "I have no idea," Robb said. "I'll think of something." The camp. Before dawn. He went to Jon's tent himself. He didn't send anyone. He walked through the pre-dawn camp alone, past the fires where men on watch were doing that specific kind of alert but empty staring that night watch produces, and he pushed through Jon's tent flap without announcing himself because Jon would have heard him coming anyway. Jon was awake. Of course he was. He was sitting on his cot in his shirt with Ghost at his feet, cleaning a knife the way he did when he couldn't sleep, the methodical back and forth that was more habit than necessity. He looked up when Robb came in, read his face. "Sit down," Jon said. "I'm fine, standing." "You look like someone died." A beat. He heard himself. Someone else. Robb sat down on the chest across from him. He'd been composing this conversation in his head for 3 hours. He'd had several good versions of it, all of them clear and well-structured, and when he opened his mouth, what came out was, "Howland Reed told me about the Tower of Joy." Jon set the knife down. Not slowly. He just stopped moving, mid-stroke, and set it down. And then he was very still, in the way Jon was still, when something large had hit him, and he was deciding whether to show it. "Everything?" Jon asked. "Everything." "How long have you... Did you know before?" "Last night. He came to camp. He said, Father would have told me eventually." Robb watched him. "Did you know?" "No." He said it quickly, then stopped. "Not exactly. He stopped again. "There were things. Pieces that didn't fit. I never asked because he looked like it cost him every time I got close to asking." Robb nodded. That was Ned Stark, exactly. You could see the cost on him if you knew where to look. "The Lords meet the day after tomorrow," Robb said. Jon looked at him. "They're going to declare for the North, declare a king." Robb met his eyes. "Your claim supersedes mine, Jon." "Don't. Don't." Jon stood up. Ghost stood with him. No, that's not... I'm not doing that, Robb. I'm a bastard from Winterfell. I'm not... You're not a bastard. That's the entire... I've been a bastard my whole life. What does it matter what some... I took no name. I wanted the wall. I never... Jon. Robb stood too, because Jon's standing made the tent feel small, and he wasn't going to have this conversation at different heights. "I know. I know what you wanted. I know you didn't ask for any of this." He looked at his brother. His cousin, technically. But the word didn't fit. It would never fit the way brother did. "I didn't ask for any of it either, and here we are." Jon turned away, walked the 3 steps to the back of the tent, and stopped because there was nowhere to go. Ghost padded after him and leaned against his leg. "I'm not a king," Jon said, to the tent wall. "Nobody is, until they are. That doesn't mean anything. It means Father wasn't Lord Stark until he was. It means Robert wasn't king until he was. Robert is what happened when someone who shouldn't be king became king. That's your argument." "My argument," Robb said, "is that I'm about to be declared king in the North with a good claim and a real army, and that's going to buy us exactly as much legitimacy as one northern rebellion can produce, which isn't enough. We need the Riverlands to hold, and the Vale might move, and the Tyrells are sitting in Highgarden watching, and all of that changes if what? If you hand the crown to a bastard no one's heard of. If we hand it to Rhaegar Targaryen's son." The words sat in the cold tent air. Ghost's tail moved once. Jon didn't turn around for a long time. When he did, his face was closed in the way it closed when he was managing something, which Robb had been watching happen his whole life, and had learned to read as this is costing him. "You've been up all night planning this." "I've been up all night hoping you'd say yes without me having to convince you." "I'm saying no." "I know." Robb sat back down. "Tell me why." "Because I don't want it. Because I'm not built for it." "Because you are..." "I'm built for war. That's different from kingship. You're literally the Lord of the North. You've been trained for this, and you've spent your whole life watching people, reading rooms, knowing what people need before they know they need it." Robb leaned forward. "Father used to say, he said it once to me, when I was 12. He said Jon sees people. He said it like that, like it was the most important thing he could have said." Jon was quiet. "He was protecting you," Robb said. 15 years of lying to everyone he loved. I'm not angry at him. I understand why. But Jon, that protection cost him. It cost him his reputation, his marriage, his honesty, his life in the end. He looked at him. "Don't make it mean nothing." That was too much. Robb knew it was too much the moment he said it, and he watched it land, and he watched Jon's jaw set, and he thought, "I've pushed too far. He's going to..." "Get out," Jon said. "I need to think." "Jon, get out of my tent, Robb. I'm not saying no forever. I'm saying I need to think." Robb got up, went to the flap, stopped. "The Lords meet at dawn the day after tomorrow," he said. "If you need time..." I said I need to think. He left. The night was cold and the camp was quiet, and somewhere in a tent behind him, his brother was sitting with a ghost and a wolf and the wreckage of everything he thought he knew about himself. Robb went back to the maps. He didn't sleep either. Robb and Jon. The argumentee, 298 AC. The next morning, Jon found Robb before breakfast, and they argued for 2 hours. Not quietly. The men outside the tent could hear it. Not the words, mostly, but the rhythm of it. Two voices cycling through the same territory repeatedly, one pushing and one resisting, and neither of them willing to stop. Theon Greyjoy, who had the poor timing to arrive at the tent mid-argument with a report on the supply trains, stood outside with the report in his hand for 20 minutes before he decided the report could wait and left without announcing himself. Inside. "You haven't thought about what this actually means," Jon said. "What it means for the Lords, for the men. They declared for you. They haven't declared yet. They're about to. And when you walk in and say, actually the crown goes to the bastard who showed up 2 months ago, the son of Rhaegar Targaryen who..." "I'm not going to tell them that. You can't tell them that." "Why not?" "Because half of them have sons who died in the rebellion, and telling them their dead children died so that Rhaegar Targaryen's son could eventually be king of the North is..." "Robb, that's insane. You can't..." "I'm not planning to frame it that way." "How are you planning to frame it?" Robb paused. He'd been working on this. "As you're Ned Stark's blood. That's true. You're Lyanna's son. That's also true. And you are, structurally, the better claim. I say that, and I back it, and the men who trust me will do what you tell them. Which is the problem?" Jon turned away. A king chosen because his brother told everyone to choose him is not a king. He's a puppet with a better origin story. That's not. It is. It is exactly that. He turned back. "Even if I wanted this, and I don't, you can't build a kingdom on, trust me, he's legitimate. You need people who believe it. You need time and demonstration, and I don't have either. Then earn it. That's what kings do." Jon stared at him. "You make it sound simple." "I make it sound possible. Those are different. A long silence. Jon sat down heavily on a camp stool. Ghost put his head in his lap. He stared at the ground. "Sansa," he said finally. "Arya." Robb went still. "They're in King's Landing," Jon said. "Joffrey has them. Or Cersei, or whoever is actually running it down there." He looked up. "If I'm king, if this works, what happens to them? Joffrey doesn't negotiate with a bastard rebel. He might negotiate with a Targaryen king. He might not. But there's at least... There's a conversation available that there isn't otherwise," Robb said. "Yes." Jon rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm not saying yes. I'm saying that part. That I can see." Robb sat down across from him. He didn't say anything. He'd learned over 16 years when to stop talking and let Jon get to where he was going on his own. "Father used to say," Jon started, stopped. "He used to say, you do the thing that's right even when it costs you. Even when it's not the thing you want." He looked at Robb. "I hate that he's dead, and he's still making me do things." Robb's face did something complicated. He looked away. "Not yes," Jon said. "But talk to the lords first. Let me hear what they say. If they don't want it, they'll want it if I tell them why they want it. Then tell them. And if they still... If it falls apart, I take it back and we do it my way." Jon looked at him. "You'd do that?" "Jon, I'd follow you into anything. I've been following you into things since I was 4 years old." A beat. "That's not me being generous. That's just true." Ghost's tail thumped against the ground. Outside, the camp was waking up. The declaration, the Lords, 298 AC. The Great Hall at River Run was cold in the way of halls that were built for summer and have seen too many winters. Torches lined the walls and threw uneven light across the faces of the lords, who were assembled in the way of men who know they are about to do something historic and have complicated feelings about that. Jon stood to the side of the hall, which was a position Robb had specifically given him. Not at the front, not behind. To the side, visible, with enough room between him and the assembled lords that he was present without being central. He looked like he was waiting to be arrested. Robb took the floor. He was good at this, Robb. Better than Jon had expected, though he should have expected it. He'd watched his father hold court at Winterfell from the time he was old enough to watch, and he'd absorbed the thing Ned did that nobody talked about, which was that Ned never performed authority. He just had it, and it communicated itself without theatre, and Robb had inherited this in the way that the useful things sometimes pass between fathers and sons. He laid it out. Not everything. Not the Tower of Joy. Not the full history. He was smarter than that. He said, "My father carried a secret for 15 years. He carried it because he made a promise to his sister. That secret is Jon Snow's true parentage. He said, Jon is Lyanna Stark's son. He is northern blood, raised at Winterfell, trained at Winterfell. He is as much a Stark as any of us. He said, he also has a claim, a blood claim, documented with Howland Reed as witness, that supersedes mine by any traditional reading of succession." Then he stopped, and he waited. The hall erupted, and Robb let it, because you can't manage the eruption until it's spent itself. Lord Umber was first. "The bastard! You want us to crown the bastard?" Robb said. "He's not a bastard." "Patient." Lord Karstark, whose sons had died at Oxcross. "What's the mother's name?" "Lyanna Stark." Karstark sat back. He turned this over. Something changing in his face. Lord Mormont of Bear Island, old, stone-faced, the kind of woman who had outlived several attempts to underestimate her, said, "And the father?" Robb hesitated. Just briefly. Jon spoke from the side of the room. "Rhaegar Targaryen." He said it flat. No performance, no apology for it. My father was Rhaegar Targaryen. My mother was Lyanna Stark. I was born at the Tower of Joy in Dawn. I have been Jon Snow my whole life, and I'd prefer to stay Jon Snow. But the claim is what it is. The hall went very quiet. Lady Mormont said, "You're a Targaryen. By blood, not by... I wasn't raised one. I don't know any High Valyrian. I've never seen a dragon." A beat. I grew up at Winterfell. I ate at the wrong table and trained in the yard, and I know the North because I lived in it. That's what I am. The rebellion, Lord Umber started. I know what the rebellion was. I know what it cost. I know my grandfather died in it, and men from every house in this room lost people in it. Jon looked at him directly. I didn't start that war. I wasn't born until after it ended. You can hate my blood. You can hate what my blood means to you. That's your right. He let that sit for a moment. But Robb is offering you a king with a legitimate claim and a war council that can actually reach south of the neck. If you want to pass on that because you don't like who my father was, that's also your right. Lord Umber opened his mouth, closed it. Lady Mormont said, "The North has bled enough for other people's wars. If this one serves the North..." "It's not just the North," Jon said. "It can't be. The North alone doesn't win. A king of the North who stays north while Joffrey sits in King's Landing and calls himself legitimate." He shook his head. "That's a siege, not a war. You starve eventually." "You're not supposed to be campaigning for yourself," Robb said dryly. "I'm not. I'm explaining the military situation." Karstark said, "What's the difference?" "The difference is I'm right either way." Something in the hall shifted. Jon couldn't quite see where it shifted from. A look between Karstark and Umber. Something in Lady Mormont's expression that moved from skepticism to something more like consideration. Then Lord Glover stood. He was a careful man, Robert Glover. Not the loudest voice in the room, but people tended to wait for it. He said, "I followed Ned Stark because he was honourable. Because when Ned Stark said a thing you could stake your life on it." He looked at Jon. "He lied to protect you. For 15 years. A beat. That is not a small thing." Jon didn't say anything. "It means he believed you were worth protecting," Glover said. "It means he staked his reputation on you. His honour." He looked at the room. "I'll take Ned Stark's wager." Robb looked at Jon. Jon looked at Glover. The discussion went for another hour. Jon answered questions. He answered some well and some badly, and one of them, Lord Manderley asking about the Iron Bank and the debt, he didn't know the answer to it all and said so, which produced a silence, and then, unexpectedly, a small sound from Robb that might have been a laugh. When the vote came, it wasn't unanimous. Umber abstained. 2 of the smaller lords voted no. The rest voted yes, some with visible reluctance, and some with the bright certainty of people who have made up their mind and are glad to have it made. Someone produced a crown. Not a great one. The North didn't have the Lannister habit of carrying gold everywhere, but solid iron, dark, the kind of thing that looks like it was made to be worn rather than admired. Robb picked it up. Jon looked at it. "I want to note," Jon said. "For the record..." "Noted," Robb said. "You didn't want this. Now, hold still." He put the crown on his brother's head. The hall shouted. Ghost howled somewhere outside, which none of them had arranged, and the sound of it went through the stone walls and out into the cold air, and some of the lords who had been uncertain felt something shift when they heard it. Something old and northern, and not entirely explainable. Jon stood with a crown on his head that didn't fit quite right, and looked at his brother. Robb was grinning. He couldn't help it. He was also blinking more than he needed to. "Your Grace," Robb said. "Don't," said Jon. What Joffrey does next. King's Landing. Joffrey's response, when news reached King's Landing that Robb Stark had not crowned himself, but had instead crowned a bastard who claimed to be Rhaegar Targaryen's son, was to laugh. Cersei did not laugh. She sat in her solar with the Raven's message and read it 3 times, and then set it face down on the desk. Tyrion, who had been summoned and arrived to find her in that posture, read the situation correctly and poured himself a drink before asking questions. "Is it true?" he asked. "Howland Reed witnesses the claim?" He was at the Tower of Joy. She looked at the ceiling. "It might be true." If it's true, then Joffrey has a bastard problem." She looked at him. 2 of them, actually. The one in the north with 50,000 men and a crown, and the one that the northern bastard will use against us. Tyrion said, "The parentage question. If he's going to be king of anything, he'll need legitimacy he can demonstrate. The obvious play is to announce that Joffrey's legitimacy is—" She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "Compromised. Has he made that play?" "Not yet, but he will. Varys has already sent 3 ravens south, and I don't know to whom." "Varys," Tyrion said. "Right." He drank. "The north won't hold on its own. He needs the Riverlands, the Tyrells." "The Tyrells," Cersei said, "are being courted. By the ravens that have been going to Highgarden for the past 2 weeks." She stood. Margaery Tyrell is 18 years old and she wants to be queen. Joffrey is Joffrey. She didn't finish that thought. She didn't need to. If they offer her the other option, Jon Snow is not married. Not yet. Tyrion was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to do?" She turned to look at him. This was its own unusual thing. Cersei asking Tyrion for counsel, or coming close enough to it that the distinction blurred. She did it rarely, and only when she was genuinely frightened, which Tyrion noted without saying so. "Sansa," she said. He waited. "She's here. She's Stark blood. If Jon Snow is actually Robb Stark's, if the claim is real, she becomes more valuable than she was." She pressed her lips together. "Use her. Before he does. To what end? He's not going to negotiate his sister's safety against—" "Not negotiation." She looked at him. "A letter. From Sansa. To Jon. Whatever a girl who wants to go home says. Show him she's alive. Show him we're not— that she's being treated well." She moved to the window. "And tell Joffrey to stop talking about the bastard." "He won't stop." "Then tell him to stop publicly. He can say whatever he wants in private." She looked at the city below. If he keeps calling him a bastard and the man turns out to be Rhaegar's legitimate son, we'll have spent our credibility calling something false that's true. Tyrion raised an eyebrow. "That's actually a good point." "I have them occasionally." She didn't look at him. "Go." Tyrion went. In the corridor outside, he stood for a moment with his drink and thought about Sansa Stark, who was 17 years old and in the Red Keep and had been managing Joffrey's moods for 6 months with the careful, exhausting grace of someone walking a very fine line over a very long drop. He went to find her. King's Landing. Tyrion decides. 298 AC. Tyrion had the letter for 4 days before he did anything with it. It came through a chain he didn't examine too closely. A small bird, a note, a name he recognized at the bottom that was not a name he'd expected to see attached to a message addressed to him. Varys. The note said 3 things. It said, Jon Snow is Rhaegar Targaryen's son. Howland Reed is the witness. It said, he is not going to lose this war. And it said, you have been useful to your family for 30 years. It might be time to consider being useful to the realm. He burned the note. Then he poured himself a drink and sat with it for a long time. He was not sentimental about the Lannisters. He was sentimental about Jaime, and occasionally about Cersei, in the specific way you're sentimental about something you can see is going wrong and cannot stop. He was not sentimental about his father, who was the most capable and most ruthless man he'd ever known, which were qualities Tyrion had spent his life trying to separate from each other with limited success. The thing about Jon Snow wasn't the blood. Tyrion had grown up around blood claims and had found them, without exception, used to justify things that would have been unjustifiable without them. The blood wasn't interesting. What was interesting was what Varys hadn't said, because Varys was very precise about what he didn't say. Varys had not said, "Jon Snow will be a good king." He'd said, "He is not going to lose this war," which meant Varys had met him, had assessed him, had found something in him that Varys found in very few people over 30 years of finding things in people. Tyrion thought about Joffrey. He thought about Joffrey's reign of 11 days, which had included a public execution, 2 floggings for minor offences, and 1 incident involving a crossbow that Cersei had managed to suppress, but that Tyrion knew about because he knew most things. He thought about the Lannister position, about what loyalty to that position had cost him personally over the years, in blood and dignity, and the specific grinding exhaustion of being the smartest person in a room that was determined to waste that. He thought about the letter that Sansa had written and the letter that Sansa had given him, which were not the same letter. And he'd known that when she handed it to him, and he'd read it with the surface of his attention, while the rest of his attention noticed what she was doing. She was 17 years old, and she was playing the long game. She was playing it in the middle of a siege, and a succession crisis and a hostile court, and she was playing it cleanly, which meant she had been paying attention and learning, which was all Tyrion had ever really required of people to find them interesting. He picked up a quill. He wrote 2 letters. The first was to Jon Snow. Not formal. He'd never been good at formal, which was a liability in a court and an asset in any situation that required someone to say the true thing quickly. He wrote, "Your claim is real. You are going to need someone in the south who knows where the bodies are buried. I know where most of the bodies are buried. I'd like to propose a practical arrangement before Cersei makes the arrangement impossible by burning the city down, which is a real possibility I've been managing for 3 months." He wrote, "I've also been corresponding with your sister, who is sharper than anyone in this city has noticed. You should let her do something more useful than surviving." He wrote, "I'm not declaring loyalty. I'm proposing a business arrangement. You can decide if you trust me when we've met." The second letter was to Varys, which said only, "Send it." He put down the quill. He looked at his wine. He thought, "I'm going to regret this." He thought, "I'm also going to regret not doing it, and I've been doing the regrettable thing in the direction of family loyalty for 30 years, and it has not improved my situation." He drank the wine. He waited. The reply from Jon Snow came in 8 days, which was fast, which meant the king had read it the same day it arrived and responded immediately, which told Tyrion something about how decisions were made in the northern camp. The reply said, "Come when the city falls. There'll be work. Your sister tells me you don't want the throne. Good. We'll get along. Your sister. Not my wife's counselor or Lady Sansa or any of the court-appropriate designations. Your sister." Tyrion read it twice. He thought about Sansa in the city for 6 months, surviving Joffrey, writing letters, learning the court, and apparently putting in a good word to a king she'd never met for a brother who had never done enough to deserve it. He put the letter down. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, which was the specific, unfamiliar warmth of someone doing something for you when they had no obligation to. He went to check on the grain stores. He had a city to keep alive for 3 more months. King's Landing, Sansa, 298 AC. The news reached Sansa on a Wednesday, from a source she was not supposed to have, which was a serving girl named Pia, who had a brother in the city watch who had heard things at the docks. Jon, King. She sat with it for most of the day. She couldn't react, couldn't be seen reacting, couldn't give Joffrey or Cersei or any of the watching court something to use. So she sat through dinner and smiled at the right moments and said nothing that mattered, which she had become very good at in the 6 months since her father's head. At night, she let herself feel it. Alone in her room, with the door latched and the candle burning low. Jon, King, not Robb, Jon. Which meant she worked through it. Which meant Robb had found out and believed it and given it away. Which was so Robb it hurt. It was so completely, and obviously, her brother doing the thing he'd do, that she almost laughed. Almost. Jon was going to be terrible at this. She loved him, and he was going to be terrible at it. He was going to try to manage it the way he managed everything, by being competent and stubborn and honest. And honesty was not a great starting position for kingship. It was a liability that needed careful management, and Jon didn't like to manage things he thought shouldn't need managing. She thought, someone needs to tell him that. She thought, someone needs to help him. She thought, I'm here. I can help from here. I know things he doesn't know. I know this city. She got up. She went to her writing desk. She started a letter. Not the one Cersei had suggested. She'd heard the suggestion was coming. Pia had heard that too. And she'd had time to think about what Cersei wants me to write to Jon meant and what the useful response to it was. She didn't write what Cersei wanted. She wrote what Jon needed. She wrote about the city, about Cersei and Joffrey and where the power actually sat versus where it appeared to sit. She wrote about the small council and which members were their own men and which were managed. She wrote about the Tyrells, who she'd been watching negotiate Margaery's position for 3 months and who were considerably cleverer than they were given credit for. She wrote, they're going to offer you Margaery. You should take it, not because of her, though she's genuinely kind and smarter than almost everyone here, but because the Tyrells don't join causes they don't believe will win, and them joining you is the signal that will move the other houses. She wrote, the girls from the city, the ones Joffrey. She stopped. Cross that out. Start it again. There are things happening here you need to know about, and I'll tell you when I see you. Get me out of here first. She wrote, I know how to do this. I know how courts work now. I didn't when I came south, and I paid for not knowing. Let me help. She folded it. She sat looking at it. She had no way to send it safely. She had no one she fully trusted. She thought about Tyrion. She didn't trust Tyrion. But she understood him, which was different and more useful. She understood that Tyrion Lannister served himself, and that his self-interest and her self-interest had significant overlap in a world where Jon Snow was king, and Joffrey Baratheon was not going to last. She hid the letter. When Tyrion came the next morning to ask her to write to Jon, she said she would. She wrote something simple, careful, the kind of thing that conveyed I am alive, and I am not broken, without giving Cersei anything useful. She gave it to Tyrion with both hands and let him read it, which he did. He looked at her when he finished. Something in his face she couldn't quite name. This is exactly what my sister would have wanted, he said. I know. A beat. It's also... He stopped. Never mind. Thank you, Lady Sansa. She watched him go. She thought, he noticed. He's thinking about it. Good. Let him think about it. The campaign. Jon and Robb. 299 AC. The war did not go well at first. Not because they were losing. They weren't exactly. It was more complicated than losing. They were winning battles and failing to convert the wins into the political ground they needed, which was a different kind of problem and harder to explain to men who had just driven Lannister soldiers off a field. Jon learned this fast and hated learning it. He was good in the field. He'd always known he was good in the field, or suspected it. Training at Winterfell had given him the instinct, and Ghost had somehow given him the rest, the ability to hold very still before moving very fast that made him nearly impossible to surprise. He and Robb had divided it early and clearly. Jon held the strategic picture. Robb held the battlefield. Robb was better at the battlefield. Jon was better at the picture. Neither of them said this out loud because they didn't need to. The council was harder. He had Robb and Catelyn Tully, who arrived from Riverrun with 300 Tully swords and the specific manner of a woman who has assessed a situation and found it wanting but is going to make the best of it, which is a different energy from warm support, and Jon learned to read the difference fast. Catelyn thought Ned had been foolish to hide him. Not the hiding, but the extent of it. The way the secret had grown teeth by not being told. She said this to Robb. She didn't say it to Jon directly. Jon heard it anyway, and didn't say anything about it, and Robb knew he'd heard, and also didn't say anything about it. Then there was Great Jon Umber, who had come around to Jon with the enthusiasm of a man who decided on a thing and committed to it completely, which was both an asset and a liability because the Great Jon's commitment occasionally expressed itself in ways that required diplomatic cleanup. And Roose Bolton, who smiled too quietly and agreed too readily, and whose eyes were the specific color of frozen water, and who Jon found he could not read clearly, which was unusual enough to be notable. He told Robb about Bolton. "I know," Robb said. "You know, and you haven't. I've been watching. We need his men right now. When we don't need his men, you deal with him." "Yes." Jon looked at him. "Before he deals with us." "I'm aware of the timeline, Jon." "Are you?" He wasn't sure why he pushed on it. Bolton made the back of his neck tight in a way that he'd learned to trust. He smiles like he knows something. Everyone smiles like they know something. That's what nobility looks like. Jon left it alone. He shouldn't have left it alone. Later, he would know he shouldn't have left it alone. But the war was demanding, and the political pressure from the south was demanding, and he had Tyrells to negotiate with, and Jon Snow had not been born with the natural mistrust of every smiling face that the work of kingship required. And he was learning it, but learning it takes time, and time was what they had least of. The Tyrell negotiation came through Varys. Varys had been maintaining a correspondence. Jon was never quite sure how. He existed somewhere between the camps and the capital in a way that defied the usual rules of where people could be. And the correspondence indicated that Lord Mace Tyrell was interested in an arrangement, that Lady Olenna Tyrell was considerably more interested in a different arrangement, and that Margaery herself had opinions that weren't entirely her father's. Jon met with Olenna first. Lady Olenna arrived at camp with the retinue and the sedan chair and the organized chaos of a woman who had been performing frailty as camouflage for 40 years and had gotten very good at it. She was brought to Jon's tent, and she sat down without being invited and looked at him with the sharp, clear eyes of someone who has outlived everyone who ever underestimated her. "You're younger than I thought," she said. "People say that." "And?" She tilted her head. "Are they right? I'm exactly as old as I am. Whether that's young depends on what you're comparing it to." She made a sound that might have been approval. "Well, you're not boring, I'll give you that. Joffrey is unendurable. Robert was a drunk. The one before." She waved a hand. "Ancient history." She looked at him. "My granddaughter is 18, and she wants to be queen." "I know." "What she wants in a husband?" "Lady Olenna." He said it evenly. "I'm not going to discuss your granddaughter as a political transaction while she's not in the room." She stared at him. "She can tell me herself what she wants," Jon said. if the alliance interests the Tyrells. I'd like to meet her. You'd like to. She stopped. She sat back. She looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone running a calculation. Tomorrow morning. She rises early. She left. Robb, who had been standing in the back corner of the tent throughout this exchange, waited until she was gone. She could have been offended by that, he said. She wasn't. How do you know? She made a noise. She made a noise. A specific noise. Jon stood and stretched. She'll be back tomorrow. With Margaery. He was right. They came back. Jon and Margaery spoke for 2 hours, mostly about the political shape of the South and the Tyrell position, and what an alliance would actually require, as opposed to what their fathers would say it required. She was sharp and direct, and she didn't waste words, and at the end of it she said, "You're not what I expected from a man in this position." What did you expect? Someone who wanted the throne. I want the war to end, Jon said. The throne is what you sit in to do that. She looked at him for a moment. That's an interesting distinction. It's a real one. She agreed to the betrothal 2 days later. Olenna had brokered 3 conditions. Jon accepted 2 immediately, negotiated the 3rd, and when the papers were signed, 30,000 Tyrell swords began moving north. Robb found Jon after the signing, clapped him on the shoulder. She likes you, Robb said. She likes the alliance. Both can be true. He grinned. You could be worse at this. I'm not good at it. You're better than you think. Jon didn't respond to that. He went to write to Sansa, because Sansa's first letter had arrived through a chain he didn't examine too closely. Tyrion's handwriting on the outside, Sansa's inside, and what she'd said about the Tyrells had been right. Almost word for word what Lady Olenna had eventually revealed. He told her it had helped. He told her he was working on getting her out. He told her to hold on. He didn't know if the letter would reach her. He sent it anyway. The Betrayal. 299. C. The Boltons moved on a Thursday. Jon was 50 miles away, meeting with a Tyrell commander about supply chains, and the first raven he received said only, "Robb is under attack." "Come now." He was on his horse before the raven was finished. He rode through the night, with Ghost ranging ahead in the dark and 100 cavalry behind him, and no plan beyond get there, because there was no plan available that didn't require being there first. He arrived at dawn. The twins were already gone. The Freys had closed their gates. Bolton's men were on the roads, and they were flying the wrong banners, and 2 ravens had been sent south. He knew because the men he'd sent ahead had intercepted one of the Frey ravens still in the air, which was either Luck or Varys, and he didn't know which. Robb was alive. Barely. They found him outside the walls, with a handful of men who had fought their way out, and Catelyn Tully, who was... Jon saw this and made himself breathe. Who was alive. She was alive. Bleeding from a cut on her arm, and something else he couldn't see yet, but alive. Robb had 3 arrows in him, which was 3 arrows that had not hit the center of him, because he had, somehow, managed to not be standing in the center of him when they were loosed. One was in his shoulder. One had gone through the meat of his side. One had grazed his neck. Jon got off his horse. He looked at Robb. Robb looked back at him with the pale, set expression of someone managing a great deal of pain by refusing to acknowledge that the pain is happening. "Bolton," Jon said. "Bolton." A breath. "And Frey, we should have..." "Not now." Jon turned to the men behind him. "Maesters, now, and riders to the Tyrell lines." He turned back to Robb. "Can you ride?" "I can do whatever needs doing." "That's not what I asked." "Yes." A pause. "Slowly. Then we move slowly." Jon crouched beside him. He wasn't good at this. at the visible expression of the thing he felt, which was the specific terror of someone who had spent his life following a person and has just learned the person nearly died. He put his hand on Robb's arm. "You're not dead. Thank you for the update. I was worried." "I know you were worried. So was I." Robb looked at him. His face was pale under the blood. "Bolton's heading for Winterfell." Jon went still. "He'll take it before we can—" Robb started. "I know. Jon. I know." He stood. He looked north, as if he could see it from here, which he couldn't, but the habit of looking north was built into him so deeply, it happened before he thought about it. Winterfell. Bran was there. Rickon. The servants who had been in the castle his whole life. The crypts where the Starks were buried. "He'll burn it," Catelyn said quietly. She was standing just behind them. Her voice was very controlled in the way voices go controlled when the alternative is something that can't be taken back. "If he can't hold it, he'll burn it." Jon breathed through his nose. "Get Robb to the Meisters," he said, "and send a raven to Theon Greyjoy." Catelyn blinked. Theon knows Winterfell better than anyone who isn't a Stark. He knows the passages. He knows the people." He turned. "Tell him what's coming. Tell him—" He stopped. He thought about Theon, who was complicated in the way that people who have always been between two places are complicated. Tell him it's his choice. But if he wants to choose, now is when. Catelyn said nothing. "I know," Jon said, "but we use what we have." He went to organize the cavalry. Winterfell, the taking, 299 AC. Roose Bolton reached Winterfell with 4,000 men and found it already occupied, not by an army, by Theon Greyjoy, 17 Ironborn, Bran Stark on his horse, Rickon Stark, who was 5 years old and furious, and Hodor, who was not a fighter, but who was very large and had positioned himself in the main corridor in a way that made Bolton's lead riders uncomfortable. This was not what Roose Bolton had planned for. What he had planned was to arrive before anyone could organize a defense, take the castle from a skeleton garrison, display the Stark children at the walls as leverage, and negotiate from a position of overwhelming force. He was a man who planned comprehensively and executed cleanly, and had never in his life encountered a problem he couldn't solve by being patient and quiet. Theon Greyjoy presenting himself at the gate with a loaded crossbow and a Stark direwolf puppy behind him was not in the plan. "Greyjoy," Bolton said. He kept his voice level. He had never been a man who let surprise register on his face. "I didn't expect you here." "No," Theon said. "I didn't expect to be here. The castle is the seat of House Stark, which is under the protection of the king, His Grace Jon Snow, whom you just tried to murder." Theon looked at him over the crossbow. "I'd stay where you are." "You have 17 men." "I have 17 men and a very large wolf and 2 Stark children, one of whom has green sight and probably knows things about you I don't." He paused. "You could try to take it. You'd get it eventually, yeah. But Bran would be in the crypts in the first 5 minutes, and those tunnels go, well, a long way." He tilted his head. "Or you could not be here when Jon Snow arrives with cavalry, which is going to be soon." Bolton looked at him. He looked at the walls, at the wolf, at the boy on the horse with the uncanny eyes, who was looking at him with the expression of someone who was simultaneously watching this moment and watching something else. He didn't believe in green sight. He had never believed in northern superstition. He retreated north. 3 hours later, Jon's cavalry arrived. Jon went straight to the castle. He went straight to the boys. He held Rickon, who was 5 and who didn't cry, and who was clearly his father's son in ways that were going to be complicated as he grew up. He talked to Bran for a long time, longer than the situation probably required, But Bran said things that Jon found himself wanting to remember, and Bran was not a boy who repeated himself. Then he went to Theon. Theon was on the battlements, which was where he apparently went when he wanted to be somewhere that required climbing and therefore effort, and therefore didn't inviting casual company. Jon went up anyway. "You came," Jon said. Theon shrugged. "Your raven was very clear about what was happening." "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I." He looked out over the yard. This isn't my home. I know that. I've always known that. He stopped. "I wanted to be useful to something actual. Not Balon's war. Something—" He shook his head. "Never mind." "No," Jon said. "Say it." Theon looked at him sideways. "Something worth the bother." Jon was quiet for a moment. "Then stay." "As what?" "I don't know yet. We'll figure it out." He looked out at the yard too. Winterfell in the morning light, the grey stone and the hot spring warmth rising through the flags. "You saved them, Bran and Rickon. You could have. There were easier things to do." "I know. I'm not going to forget that." Theon didn't say anything. He looked at the yard. Jon left him there and went to deal with the 17 things that required dealing with. Sansa, the city falls apart. 299 AC. Joffrey's position had been deteriorating since the Tyrell army moved north. Without Tyrell grain, the city was 3 weeks from the kind of hunger that produced riots, and riots in King's Landing had a historical tendency to become fires, and fires in King's Landing had a historical tendency to become catastrophes. Cersei knew this. Cersei had been managing it, managing Joffrey, managing the small council, managing the food stores in the way of someone performing an incredibly difficult juggling act while pretending the juggling is not happening. Then the Blackwater. Jon hadn't planned the Blackwater. He'd sent Stannis Baratheon, because Stannis was the specific weapon you reached for when you needed someone to conduct a naval assault with absolute competence and no interest in political credit, south with a fleet and authority to do what was necessary. Stannis had done what was necessary. The battle was brutal and not entirely clean. It cost them 2 ships and 300 men, and it cost Joffrey the harbour and the Tyrell-supplied grain that would have been coming through it, and it cost Cersei the last of the argument that King's Landing could hold indefinitely. Sansa watched the battle from her window. Not closely. The fighting was at the harbour, and she could only see the smoke and hear the sounds, the dull percussion of it carrying through the city air. But she watched the smoke change colour when something was burning that shouldn't be burning, and she watched the direction of the rout, and she knew before the ravens confirmed it. The city was going to fall. She had 11 hours, roughly. She used them. She went to Tyrion. He was in his chambers, which had the look of a man who had been thinking very hard for a long time and had reached several conclusions he was not comfortable with. She closed the door and sat down without being invited, which was the Cersei move, and she knew it was the Cersei move, and she did it deliberately. "I need to get to Jon," she said. He looked at her. "The city is going to fall," she said. "You know it is." Cersei knows it. Joffrey doesn't know it because Joffrey only knows what he wants to be true. But Cersei isn't going to... Cersei will get herself and the children out. She'll have a plan. She's been planning since the Tyrells moved. Sansa looked at him. "I'm not part of her plan." Tyrion was quiet. "She doesn't need me anymore," Sansa said. "I was useful as leverage. When Jon was just a northern rebellion, having Ned Stark's eldest daughter was leverage. Now She stopped. "He's going to win. And when he wins, having kept me here is a liability, not a bargaining chip. You think I think she loves her children more than she loves anything else, and getting her children out safely is going to require decisions, and I am not going to wait to find out what those decisions look like. She held his gaze. "Help me." He was quiet for a long time. She waited. She had gotten better at waiting. "I can get you to the docks," he said finally. "There's a man, if we move before midnight." "Tonight," she said. "Tonight." She was at the docks with Tyrion's man at the 11th hour. She had taken almost nothing. A cloak, a bag, a letter she'd written to Jon before she left. The rest could be replaced. The rest was things. The ship was already crewed. She didn't ask whose it was or who had arranged it. Later, she would find out it was Varys, and that Varys had known she'd need it 3 days before she'd gone to Tyrion, and she would spend a productive afternoon being furious about that, before conceding that the result was the same. She was on the ship. She watched King's Landing recede. She thought, "I hated that city." She thought, "I also learned everything there, and I hate that learning came at that cost, and I am going to make it mean something." The ship moved north. The throne, King's Landing, 299 AC. Jon did not want to enter King's Landing. This was not reluctance to victory. The victory was real, and it mattered, and people had died for it, and he took that seriously. It was more specific than that. It was about the throne room, about the chair made of swords that sat at the end of it, about what sitting in that chair would mean, permanently, visibly, before the court and the lords and the people of a city that was going to be furious about the last 6 months, regardless of who liberated them from it. Robb rode beside him, still healing, still too pale, his arm in a sling that he kept removing and had to be reminded to replace. "You're going to have to go in," Robb said. "I know. Today, specifically. I know. Because if you wait, someone will interpret the waiting as..." "I know, Robb." He looked at the gates. "I just need a minute." "You've had 20 minutes? Then I need one more." Robb was quiet. He'd learned when to push and when to let Jon get there. Jon got there. He rode through the gates. The city was not celebratory. He hadn't expected it to be. The city had been through a siege and a battle, and 6 months of Joffrey and the specific kind of hunger that makes people not particularly interested in who's liberating them, so long as the liberation comes with grain. He moved through it with the northern men and the Tyrell cavalry, and he kept his face neutral and acknowledged people who reached for him without turning it into a performance. He went to the throne room. He stood in the doorway. Ghost came in ahead of him, which was apparently just going to happen now. The wolf padded down the center of the room and sat at the base of the throne and looked at Jon over his shoulder. Jon walked to the throne. He stood in front of it. He looked at it for a long time. Robb, behind him. "You're going to have to sit in it." "I'm aware." "It's a chair. It's where Aerys Targaryen sat while he burned people. It's where Robert sat while he drank himself to death. It's where Joffrey..." He stopped. "It's a chair with a lot of history. You're going to make new history. Or I'm going to ruin the existing chair with my own bad decisions. That's also possible." He sat down, the iron cut into his back. It was genuinely, physically uncomfortable. He shifted once, found a slightly less bad position, and sat still. Ghost's tail moved once. Robb came to stand beside him. Not in front, beside, not performing. Just there. Jon looked at the room. Empty except for them. Dusty from the siege. Torches unlit. The great windows letting in the flat grey light of an overcast afternoon. "Right," Jon said. "Right," Robb said. "This is going to be terrible, yes. I was going to say hard. Both." Robb looked at him. "You'll do it." Jon looked at the empty room. "How do you know?" "Because you always do the thing that needs doing." A beat. "Even when you don't want to." even when it's not fair. Even when... He stopped. You're the most reliable person I've ever known. It's actually somewhat exhausting. Jon almost laughed. Go find Sansa, Robb said. She's going to arrive within the week, apparently. And then get the Meisters to make you a list of everyone who needs to be talked to in what order. And then be king. You're already king. Now you're just doing it from a chair. Arya. The Road Back. 299 AC. It always. I'm not armbinders. Nobody knew where Arya was. This was the thing that sat in Jon's chest like a stone. Everything else, the war and the throne and the campaign and the lords and the thousand things demanding attention every waking hour, all of it was manageable in the way that things are manageable when you have the tools and the people to manage them. Arya wasn't manageable because Arya wasn't there and he didn't know where there was. He'd sent out inquiries. Varys had sent out inquiries. The inquiries came back with fragments, unreliable, contradictory, seen in the Riverlands, reported near Harrenhal, travelling with a group of Night's Watch deserters, alone, armed, dangerous. The dangerous part he believed immediately and completely. The rest he held loosely. She showed up in King's Landing on a Tuesday in late autumn. She didn't announce herself. She walked through the gate in the company of a man Jon didn't recognize, tall, scarred, a face like something that had been hit repeatedly and had opinions about it. And she was wearing clothes that were wrong for every season, and she had a sword at her hip that she walked with, the way people walk, who have been walking with a sword for long enough that they've stopped noticing it. The gate guard stopped her. She told him who she was. He didn't believe her. She waited while he sent for someone senior, with the patient, expressionless quality of someone who has been dealing with this for a long time and has learned that arguing is slower than waiting. Jon heard about it from the third person to tell him, which was the rate at which news travelled through the Red Keep when the news was unusual enough to pass through multiple channels. He went to the gate himself. She was sitting on a wall when he arrived. The man with the scarred face was standing a few feet away in the manner of a bodyguard who has strong feelings about personal space, but is respecting it. She looked at Jon. He looked at her. She'd been 12 when he last saw her. The 12-year-old who had pestered him about sword forms in the courtyard at Winterfell, who had Needle hidden under her bed, who was the loudest and most stubborn of Ned Stark's children and the most like him in the ways that didn't show on the surface. That 12-year-old was in there somewhere. He could see the shape of her in the face. But it was underneath something that 12-year-olds didn't have, which was the expression of someone who has survived a great deal and has not decided yet how to feel about having survived it. She said, "You're king." Apparently, Robb told me, in a letter. She tilted her head. "You didn't want it. Still don't, particularly." "Good." She dropped off the wall. "You'd be terrible at it if you wanted it." He laughed. He couldn't help it. It came out of somewhere he hadn't expected. The specific, helpless laugh of a person encountering something that used to be small, and is now this. She looked at him for a moment. Then she hugged him. Not the careful hug of people performing reunion for an audience. The other kind. The kind where the person doing it is not thinking about what it looks like. He held on. The man with the scarred face looked at the middle distance with studied neutrality. When she pulled back, she looked at him. He looked at her. They did the accounting in silence that way. The months. The things that had happened. The people they were now versus the people they'd been. "Where were you?" he asked. "Everywhere." She paused. "Harrenhal for a while. The Riverlands. I was in a... It's a long story." She looked at his face. "You look tired." "I am tired." "Robb?" "Healing." "He's here. He's going to be furious you're here." "And didn't warn him." She shrugged. I didn't know I was coming until I was already going." She looked at the city behind him. "Sansa?" "2 weeks away, by Raven. She's on a ship." Arya nodded, something crossing her face that was complicated in ways he didn't try to map. She and Sansa had never been easy. That was its own project. "The man," Jon said, nodding toward the scarred face. "Sandor Clegane." She said it like it didn't require explanation. Jon looked at Clegane. Clegane looked back at him without expression. "He kept me alive," Arya said. "Mostly by accident. He'll say that. Don't argue with him." Jon looked at Clegane. "Thank you." Clegane said nothing. He looked somewhere over Jon's left shoulder with the focused attention of someone who has decided not to be present in this particular moment. "He does that," Arya said. "It means he's fine." She looked at Jon. "Can I have a room? You can have whatever you want. I want a room and someone to train with and access to the kitchens." Done, done, and done. He looked at her. "Arya." "Later." She said it without unkindness. "I know. There's a lot. We'll do the whole thing. But not at the gate." She looked at Ghost, who had appeared behind Jon in the silent way he appeared places. Her face changed when she saw him, something younger surfacing for a moment. She crouched and put out her hand. Ghost sniffed her. His tail moved. She looked up at Jon. "He's enormous. He got bigger. Nymeria." She stopped. "I know," Jon said. "She's alive. I saw her. In the Riverlands." She stood back up. The younger thing had gone back under. "She runs with a pack now. I told her to go." She said it flat. She needed to. Jon nodded. Arya walked past him into the city. Clegane followed. Ghost watched them both go. Jon stood at the gate and thought, "This is the third impossible thing I've been given back this month." Then he went inside, because there was always something that needed doing, and the list wasn't getting shorter on its own. Sansa. The Return. 299 AC. She arrived at King's Landing on a Wednesday, 12 days after the city fell. The harbour was still being cleared. There were burned hull remnants from the Blackwater pushed to the sides, and men repairing the docks, and the whole smell of the place was different. Salt and fresh timber, and the specific acrid quality of recent fire finally cooling. Jon met her at the dock. She was not prepared for that. She'd expected a representative, a servant, maybe Robb. Not Jon himself, standing at the dock with Ghost behind him and no crown visible anywhere, wearing northern clothes that were slightly wrong for the southern climate, and probably didn't care. She stopped. He looked at her. She had been holding herself together for 6 months by not letting herself think about what it would feel like to be safe. She had been competent and careful and strategic, and she had survived everything by treating it as a problem to be managed. And she had managed it. And she was here. She was actually here and safe, and... He stepped forward, and she walked into it, into the hug, which was not something she would have asked for, and was exactly what she needed. And he held on, and she didn't cry, because she was going to be here for a while, and she was going to need her composure. So she breathed, and she held on for a moment, and she said, muffled against his shoulder, "You look terrible." "Thank you." "You've not been sleeping." "I've been... There's a lot." "I know. I wrote you letters." She pulled back. She looked at him properly. She found the things that were different and the things that were the same. "You need a better small council." "I know. I have thoughts about that. I expected you might." She looked at the city behind him, at the walls still marked from the battle, at the banners that were new, northern, that would need changing or supplementing, now that this was not just a northern war. "The Tyrells." Lady Margaery arrives next month. Good. She considered how to phrase this. She will be useful to you, if you listen to her. You've met her. She came to court. Joffrey was... She stopped. She was kind to me when she didn't have to be. I trust her judgment. He nodded. The Baratheons, she started. One thing at a time. Jon, there are a lot of things and they all need... one at a time. He looked at her. You're here. You're safe. You've been alone in that city for 6 months and you survived it, and you're here. He paused. He stopped. He was bad at this. Had always been bad at this. I'm glad you're here. She held his gaze. I know, she said. Me too. He walked with her up from the dock into the city. Ghost walked between them. She told him things about King's Landing on the walk. Small observations, the kind that didn't make it into ravens. The texture of the court and the servants' movements, and where the actual power sat in a room versus where it appeared to sit. He listened the way he always listened, completely, filing everything. By the time they reached the Red Keep, she'd given him more usable intelligence about the capital than 6 months of official ravens had produced. He was going to be bad at this, she thought. He was going to make mistakes, and some of them would be serious. But he was also going to listen. He was going to listen and adjust, and he was going to pull the right people close and push the wrong ones away. And that was more than most kings managed. She could work with that. The realm, the first year, 300 AC. The first year was the hardest year. Not because they were losing. They weren't, exactly. They had the city. They had the Tyrell Alliance. They had the North and the Riverlands and the Vale, which had come in quietly through Lysa Arryn dying, and her son being a lord in name only, and Robert Arryn's regent sending a raven that said, "We have been neutral, and neutrality has served no one. We would like to be useful." They had all of that, and it was still hard. Jon's small council met every morning, and it was a running argument between people who agreed on goals and disagreed on everything else. Sansa managed the internal logistics and was better at it than any of the men who'd tried before her, which produced occasional friction she handled with the careful efficiency of someone who has learned that being right and being believed are different projects. Lady Mormont came south, which nobody had expected, and sat on the council and said exactly what she thought, without any of the diplomatic softening, which was both invaluable and regularly catastrophic. Margaery arrived and married Jon on a grey autumn morning in the Sept of Baelor, in a ceremony that was shorter than Westerosi tradition required, and considerably more honest. She gave a speech. He did not give a speech, which she had agreed to beforehand because she'd read him correctly enough to know that if he gave a speech, he would say something true and unpolished that the court would spend 3 weeks analysing. She handled the court. He handled the war. The war, because there was still a war. Cersei had gotten herself and Joffrey and Myrcella and Tommen to Casterly Rock. She'd done it in the chaos before the city fell, efficiently, the way Cersei did things she'd been planning for months. She had the Rock and Tywin Lannister, who was old now and managing the Rock rather than commanding it, and she had the Lannister Gold and the Lannister soldiers, and from Casterly Rock she kept the war alive in the form of proxy engagements and naval harassment and the specific kind of denial that says, "This is not over. You haven't won yet." Jon went west. He didn't want to. He'd been in King's Landing for 6 months, learning to be king, and he was getting fractionally better at it, and he needed to be there. And also, Robb was going to want to come, and Robb's shoulder was still not fully healed, so he left Robb in the city against Robb's considerable protests. He took the Tyrell cavalry and a third of the northern host, and he rode west. The Westerlands campaign lasted 4 months. He didn't take Casterly Rock by siege. Tyrion had told him in a letter that a siege of Casterly Rock would take longer than a year and cost more men than he could afford to spend. He took it by running out the food stores. Not starvation. He was careful about that. He was careful in ways that annoyed his generals, who had the soldiers' instinct to follow advantage wherever it led. But he was the king, and his instinct was that you didn't win by making enemies of the people you'd eventually have to govern. So they cut the supply lines, and they held the positions and they waited. And after 3 months, Tywin Lannister died. Not by battle, by age, by the specific weariness of an old man who has spent his life holding things together, watching them come apart again. And Cersei found herself without the one person in Casterly Rock whose calculation was clearer than her emotion. Jaime Lannister rode out alone. He came to Jon's camp without armor, on a single horse, in the late afternoon, with the expression of a man who has made a decision and is not certain whether it's wise, and is committed to it regardless. Jon met him at the edge of camp. They looked at each other. "You're not what I expected," Jaime said. "Everyone says that. Is it getting old?" "Slightly." Jon studied him. The missing hand. The face that was Cersei's face in a different register. "What do you want?" "To end this." He said it flat. "No performance. Cersei will keep fighting. She'll fight until there's nothing left to fight with. Because stopping is... she can't stop. She doesn't know how." He looked at Jon. "Joffrey is 16. He's terrible. He's also 16. He could be..." He stopped. "Something else. If someone gets him out of it. And the younger ones. Myrcella and Tommen should not pay for... their children. They didn't choose any of this." Jon said nothing. "I'm not asking for immunity," Jaime said. "I'm not asking for my hand back, before you make the obvious joke." He held Jon's gaze. "I'm asking for the children to be safe. For Cersei to be..." He paused. "She'll fight you to the end if you pursue her. But if you promise the children safety, real safety, she'll stop. She'll hate you forever, and she'll look for every opportunity for the rest of her life, and she'll stop." Jon thought about it. He thought about what Sansa had told him, about Tommen, who was 12 and gentle, and would make a fine lord of somewhere if someone gave him the chance to be one. He thought about Myrcella, who by all accounts was the most like Cersei in mind, if not in method, and who deserved to use that mind for something other than survival. "The children," he said, "safe and settled. Lords and ladies, not hostages." "Yes." "Joffrey goes to the Wall or to Essos. His choice. He does not stay in Westeros with a Baratheon claim." Jaime's jaw tightened. "He won't..." "Those are the terms." Jon met his eyes. "Cersei can live. She doesn't have to like it, but she lives." A long pause. "She won't like any of this. I know. She'll agree anyway. For the children." Jaime looked at him. "You knew that?" "Sansa told me." Jon looked west, toward the rock. "Tell her it's over. Tell her it ends now, before anyone else dies for it." Jaime rode back. 3 days later, the gates of Casterly Rock opened. Jaime and Jon, after Casterly Rock, 299 EC. They talked the night before Jaime left camp. Not planned. Jon had been at the supply ledgers. The Westerlands campaign ate through horses at a rate nobody had accounted for, and the accounting of it was someone else's problem, and also, currently, his problem because the someone else hadn't solved it, when a guard came to say that Sir Jaime Lannister was asking if the king had time. Jon put down the ledger. Jaime came in and sat without ceremony, which Jon found he respected. For a while neither of them said anything. Then Jaime said, "You look nothing like him." Jon looked up. "Rhaegar." Jaime was looking at the tent wall, not at Jon. "I knew him. Not well. He wasn't a man who let people in. But I was Kingsguard, and I was there when he was there, and I knew his face." He paused. "You have his bearing. Something in the way you hold yourself. Not the face." My mother was Lyanna Stark, Jon said. I've been told I have her eyes. Probably. Jaime looked at him. I didn't follow Aerys because I loved him. I want you to know that. I don't know if it matters. It doesn't need to matter. It matters to me. He looked at his missing hand. Aerys was... He stopped. By the end, he was burning people. Not enemies. People. Anyone who... He heard things in the fire. He saw things. He'd been in the throne room for months and he was... Another stop. He ordered the wildfire. All of it. The caches under the city. He looked at Jon. I killed him for it. I sat on his throne afterward, and Eddard Stark came through the door, and I let him think what he thought, because I was... I don't know. Tired. Done. He shook his head. I've regretted that since. Jon was quiet for a moment. Lord Stark told Robb, before he died, that he'd been wrong about you. Jaime looked at him sharply. He wrote it in a letter, Jon said. He said the judgment was too simple, that he hadn't asked the right questions. He held Jaime's gaze. He would have told you himself if he'd had time. The tent was quiet. Jaime said, he was a better man than most. Yes, and he died for... He stopped. He died because he told the truth to the wrong person, at the wrong moment. Joffrey. He said his nephew's name with the specific, tired disappointment of someone who has been watching a disaster accumulate for years. He's 16. He could still become... I know, Jon said. The terms stand. He goes to Essos or the Wall. He has a choice. He won't choose the Wall. Good. The Wall doesn't need him. Jon looked at the ledger on the table. Essos has made stranger men stranger things. He might find something there that he couldn't find here. Jaime considered this. You're more generous than I expected. I've been told that a lot. It's not always a compliment. I know. Jon met his eyes. But the alternative is spending the next 20 years executing everyone who was on the wrong side of a war. And at some point, you run out of people. And the people you have left are only the ones who've never had to choose anything. He shook his head. I'd rather have people who chose wrong and learned something from it. Jaime was quiet for a long time. The North, he said. The Night's Watch. What's actually real? Jon said it flat. Not metaphor, not old stories. Real. He looked at him. If you're in Essos with Joffrey, you're far enough south. But if you ever find yourself with a reason to come back... He paused. The Wall will need fighters eventually. The kind who know what it means to make a hard choice. Jaime looked at him. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He looked at Jon with the expression of a man putting something in a category he doesn't have a name for yet. He left the next morning. Jon went back to the ledgers. 3 months later, a raven came from Essos, unsigned. It said only, when the time comes, I'll remember the offer. Jon showed it to Robb. Robb read it. Jaime Lannister. Probably. You offered him the Wall? I offered him a reason. Jon set the raven down. Different thing. Robb looked at him. What? Jon said. Nothing. Robb folded the raven. You're occasionally very strange and mostly very right. It's an irritating combination. The Wall. What they all forgot. 300 AC. He'd been reading the Night's Watch reports for a year, not the official ones. Those were routed to the small council and arrived sanitized and reduced in the way of documents that have passed through too many hands before reaching the person who needed them. He had a second route, through Mormont directly, the unfiltered version. He'd been reading them and thinking about them and doing the thing the reports demanded, which was building a picture from incomplete data and deciding what the picture meant. The picture was bad. Not immediately bad. Not the kind of bad that was going to arrive next month. but the kind of bad that arrives when you haven't been watching and then you turn around and it's there. And by then, the options are limited. He raised it in council. The response was what it had been for a century, which was, we have more immediate concerns. Which was true. They did have more immediate concerns. They always did. That was the specific trap of governance. The immediate always crowded out the important, and the important sought and built for decades, and then arrived as a crisis that made everything else look small. Jon had a particular advantage over most kings who'd received these reports, which was that he'd grown up in the North, raised by a man who believed in the North, and the North didn't dismiss the Night's Watch the way the South did. The North remembered the long night in the way that places remember things that happened before they could write it down, in the stones of the buildings and the words of the songs and the specific fear that gripped old Northerners when the snow didn't melt when it should. He knew this was real. After Casterly Rock, after the war, in the quiet of early winter, he called the Lords, not to King's Landing, to the Wall. He took them north himself. Robb came, Margaery came, which surprised some of the lords and which she had cleared with him precisely because she knew it would surprise them, and surprise was a tool. Sansa came. Lady Mormont came and seemed entirely unsurprised. He took them to Castle Black, and he let Mormont show them the ranging reports, not summaries, the actual reports, in the Ranger's own words, with Mormont present to answer questions. Then he took them up, the lift to the top of the wall, all of them in groups, into the grey sky, and the world opening up, and the north stretching away to the horizon. Nobody spoke much at the top. You didn't, up there. The scale of it did something to conversation, made it feel small and insufficient. He stood beside Robb and they looked north, and Ghost sat between them the way he'd been sitting between them in one form or another for most of their lives. You've known, Robb said quietly. I've believed. It's different. Is it? Jon looked at him. Do you believe it now? Robb looked north for a long time. Yes. Then you know the difference. Back in the hall, Jon told the lords what he needed. Not everything, not all at once. He told them the next piece, the dragon glass. Dragonstone had stores, volcanic island, the obsidian deposits that nobody had used in a century because nobody had needed to. He told them the smithing question, Valyrian steel, what it took, what existed, what could be done about the gap between what existed and what they needed. Lord Umber, who had voted no at the original declaration, said, "This is real." Yes. You've seen it. Not yet. But the pattern is, show me. Jon looked at him. I've been voting wrong, Umber said bluntly. I voted no because I thought you were a power grab wearing a claim. I've been watching you for a year. If you say this is real, I'll go north with you. Jon held his gaze. He thought about the right answer, the diplomatic answer, the king's answer. He thought about what his father would have said, which was probably the true thing. He said, I don't know exactly what we'll find. I know the reports. I know the pattern. And I know we need to find it before it finds us. He paused. I'd rather be wrong about this than right. But I don't think I'm wrong. Umber nodded. When do we go? Spring. When the passes are clear. Jon looked at the room. Anyone who wants to come is welcome. Anyone who doesn't... He paused. I understand. But send your steel. Send your men. This isn't a northern problem, and it isn't a king's problem. It's everyone's problem. The lords talked for 2 more days. Most of them came. Jon and Robb, the night before. The north. 300 AC. They sat on the battlements the night before the ranging. Both of them. Old habit, old position. The same way they used to sit on the roofs at Winterfell when they were children, and the castle was asleep and the night was theirs. It was cold. It was always cold this far north. The sky was clear, and the stars were the brilliant cold stars of the north, and Ghost was somewhere below them, circling the courtyard in the way he did when he was thinking about something. "You don't have to come," Jon said. "Yes, I do. Your shoulder is fine, mostly." Robb looked at the stars. "Stop trying to manage me. I don't come under the jurisdiction of the management. You're the Lord of Winterfell. And you're the king, and you're going regardless, so..." He shrugged. "We go together." Jon was quiet. "Remember when we were kids," Robb said. "You used to say you wanted the wall. You'd talk about it like it was freedom, like joining the Watch was getting out from under. I know. And here you are, not at the wall, but going north of it, for the thing the wall was built for." He glanced at Jon. "That's not nothing." "I didn't want to be king." "I know. I still don't particularly want to be king." "I know that too." Robb paused. "You're good at it, though. Getting better." "I'm better at the parts that involve listening, and worse at the parts that involve pretending to care about things I don't care about. The ceremony stuff. The ceremony stuff. Margaery helps with that. Margaery is much better at being king than I am." He said it without rancor. It was simply true. She should be king. She's queen. Close enough. Ghost appeared at the base of the wall below them and looked up. His eyes caught the torch from the courtyard and went amber gold in the dark. Jon looked at him. He thought about Ned Stark, who had died for a secret that had produced this specific night. The two of them on a wall going north towards something no one wanted to look at. He thought about whether Ned would think it had been worth it. He thought Ned probably would. In the same quiet, private way, Ned found everything worth it that he'd decided needed doing. "If this goes badly," Jon started. "It won't." "Robb." "It won't." He looked at Jon. "Because we're going to be careful, and we're going to come back, and then you're going to keep being terrible at ceremonies, and I'm going to help you not embarrass the North." Jon looked at him. "And if it does go badly," Robb continued, "then we'll deal with it when it does." "Not tonight." Jon nodded. They sat for a while longer. "I'm glad you told me," Jon said. "About the declaration. I'm glad you didn't just let them crown you. You would have done the same. I don't know that. You had to give up." "I didn't give up anything," Robb said. "I have a war council and a seat at the table, and I have all of it." He looked at him. "I have a brother who's king. That's not nothing either." Jon didn't say anything to that. Below, Ghost walked away into the dark. Above, the stars kept their cold watch. Beyond the wall, what they found, 300 AC. They rode north in the first week of spring. 300 rangers and 30 lords, and Jon Snow and Robb Stark and Ghost, who ran ahead and came back and ran ahead again in the manner of an animal who knew where they were going. What they found was not what Jon had prepared himself to find. He had prepared for a threat. Something he could engage with, fight, burn with dragonglass and Valyrian steel and the sheer weight of an organized response. He had prepared for battle. What they found in the deep north, in a valley the maps called the Haunted Forest, was evidence of something already in retreat. The clearing had the marks of whatever the cold produced, frost patterns that moved wrong, ice formations that shouldn't exist at this time of year. The trees at the edges were touched, changed, in the way of things that have been in contact with something that alters what it contacts. But there was nothing there. No army of the dead. No immediate threat. Ghost stood at the center of the clearing and made a sound Jon had only heard twice. Not a howl, not a bark, but the deep, resonant sound of something communing with something else. And when he stopped, the clearing was very quiet. Mormont beside Jon, They've pulled back. Why? I don't know. He looked at the frost. This was active. 3 weeks ago, based on the Rangers. He looked at Jon. They retreated when you came. I'm not. Something knew you were coming. He said it plainly. Not mystical. Just the observation of a man who has been at this long enough to read the signs. Or knew what you brought. The numbers. The steel. Jon stood in the clearing for a long time. He thought, this is not finished. He thought, this is the pause before the next thing. He thought, I have the time that the retreat gave me, and I have to use it better than the 100 years of time that was wasted before this. He turned to the lords. We're coming back, he said. All of us. With more men and more steel, and the dragon glass from Dragonstone. We are going to build this into the response it should have been 100 years ago. He looked at them. And we're going to find what's controlling this, and we're going to end it. That's what this ranging is. Not the engagement, the reconnaissance. He paused. Now we know the terrain. Now we go home and prepare. Lord Umber said, what if they come before we're ready? The wall holds, Jon said. It held for 8,000 years. It holds for 6 more months while we prepare properly. He looked at the clearing, at the frost. But we do not waste the time. They rode back south. Ghost ran beside them. The wall rose before them in the afternoon light, 700 feet of ancient ice, and when they passed through the gate, Jon stopped his horse and looked back. The north was still there. It was always still there. King's Landing, what the first year built. 301 AC. A year after the throne, some things were better than expected. The grain stores were replenished. Margaery's Tyrell connections had done this, not through official channels, but through the specific network of relationships she'd been building since she was 12, knowing exactly who had what and what they needed in return. And the result was that King's Landing had stopped being 3 bad weeks from riots. The small council was not the small council that Jon had inherited. He'd dissolved it twice and rebuilt it twice, and the third version was the one that might work. Sansa for domestic affairs, which was not a traditional title and caused some friction, but produced results that the friction couldn't argue with. Tyrion for coin, because whatever else Tyrion was, he was the finest financial mind Jon had encountered, and Jon had learned to separate person I trust completely from person who is genuinely useful. Lady Mormont for the north, who came south half the year and went home the other half, and communicated by Raven in between, terse and accurate, and Robb, who was his hand and his brother, and who was in the position to tell Jon the things Jon didn't want to hear, which was the function the hand was supposed to serve. Robb was good at the things Jon didn't want to hear. He came to Jon's solar on a Tuesday evening in the first month of 301 with a cup of wine, and the expression of someone who has a difficult thing to say and has rehearsed it. Cersei's sending letters, he said. I know. To the Eastern Lords, suggesting... I know what they're suggesting. Varys intercepted 2 of them. Robb sat down. She's not going to stop. No. At some point I deal with it. Jon looked at him. Not yet. She's isolated, and she's managing Joffrey's bitterness, and she's in a castle in the Westerlands with men who are loyal to the Lannister name and less loyal to Cersei's schemes than they were to Tywin's actual leadership. She's losing influence by the month. And when she's lost enough, then I'll know what to do. He looked at his brother. Is this actually about Cersei? Robb paused. The ranging, the north. What about it? You're going back in the summer? Yes. Mormont's reports say... I've read Mormont's reports, Robb. I know you've read them. He set down his wine. I know you know what's in them. I know you've been thinking about nothing else for 6 months. He looked at him. I'm asking if you're afraid. Jon was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. Not quickly. He meant it. Okay, Robb nodded. Good, because you should be. That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be. I'm not. He stopped. Fear's useful, keeps you careful. He picked up his wine. Just don't let it make you wait too long. Jon looked at him. You tend to wait, Robb said, until you're certain. Which is good, usually. But this, I know. You can't be certain before you go. The time to go is before you're certain. Jon thought about what Howland Reed had said the night he came to camp, about what Ned would have told him. He thought about his father, his actual father, the one who believed in prophecy and died for it. He thought about whether the believing had been right or just dangerous. He thought about Ghost running ahead in the dark, knowing where to go. Spring, he said. When the pass is clear again, we go in strength. I'll be there. Robb. Jon. His voice left no room for argument. I will be there. Jon looked at him. He thought about saying it. All of it. The fear and the gratitude and the specific, impossible luck of having a brother who would give you a crown and then spend the rest of his life helping you hold it. He didn't say it. They'd never been good at saying the big things. They were good at sitting in the same room and not needing to. All right, Jon said. You'll be there. The second ranging. 301 AC. They went back in the second spring. 1,000 men this time. Not lords, men, soldiers, rangers from the Watch who knew the terrain and cavalry from the Tyrrell host, and 300 northerners who hadn't asked to come but had volunteered, because the North remembered things the South tried to forget. They crossed the wall at dawn. The land north of the wall in spring was not the land north of the wall in any other season. Things grew that you wouldn't expect to grow in this latitude, hardy and grey-green, pushing through the frost with the stubborn persistence of life that has been told no too many times and has decided not to accept it. Ghost ran. He'd been running strange since they crossed the wall. Not anxious, something else. Purposeful. Jon followed him, and the men followed Jon, and after 2 hours, they crested a rise, and Ghost stopped. Below, an army. Not an army of men. The dead, in numbers, Jon had not seen. Not in a valley this time, not in retreat. Organized. Moving. Moving south. Moving toward the wall. Jon stood on the ridge and looked at what was below him and did not let himself react for 5 seconds. 5 full seconds. Because a king on a ridge who shows panic produces panic, and panic kills people. And he had 1,000 people behind him. He turned. He was calm. He was terrified and he was calm, and these were not contradictions. Dragon glass first, he said. Every man who has it. Archers with dragon glass tips. We hold the flanks. Robb, you take the left. Give me 600. Robb was already moving, already organizing. The battle was 4 hours. Jon had planned for a battle differently from this. He had planned for something smaller, a patrol engagement, a test. He had not planned for the scale of what came over the ridge, and the 4 hours that followed were the hardest 4 hours of his life. Harder than the Red Keep, harder than Casterly Rock. Because this was not about politics or legitimacy or the carefully negotiated terms of surrender. This was fire and ice, and whether enough people with enough dragonglass and enough Valyrian steel could hold a line until the sun was high enough that the cold in the air diminished. The sun came up fully at the 3rd hour. The battle turned. Ghost moved through the fighting in ways that Jon could not entirely track. The wolf was everywhere and nowhere, and where he went, the dead went still in a way that was not entirely explained by the fighting, as though something in the blood he carried reached through the chaos and disrupted whatever was directing the dead. At the 4th hour, in the aftermath of the battle that cost them 47 men and left the field full of things that had stopped moving, Jon looked north. He saw it. Not the army. Something else. A figure. Far north, at the edge of what vision could reach. Tall. Still. Watching. Jon looked back at it. It was too far for detail. He could see cold emanating from it the way heat emanates from a forge, visible in the air. He could see it was aware of him in the way that something aware of you changes its quality of stillness. He didn't move. It didn't move. Then it turned. Moved north. Disappeared into the dark of the tree line. Robb appeared at his shoulder, breathing hard, a cut above his eye that was bleeding in the unconcerned way of head wounds. What was that? What was directing them? Jon watched the tree line. It retreated. They'll regroup. Yes. How long? Jon thought about the patterns in the ranging reports, the ebbs and flows, the timing. Months. Maybe a year. He turned. We go home. We come back with more. We won, Robb said. We won a battle. Jon looked at him. We haven't won anything yet. This was the beginning. He looked at the field, at the things that had stopped moving, at the 47 men they were going to carry home. He thought, I didn't want to be king. He thought, but someone had to. He thought, and now it's mine to finish. King's Landing, after 301 AC. He came back to King's Landing in midsummer. The city was different from the city he'd ridden into after the battle. The markets were full. The walls were repaired. The harbour was busy with the specific productive noise of a harbour that was being used for commerce rather than war. Not his doing, mostly. Margaery's, Sansa's, Robb's, the council's. His doing was staying alive and making the decisions that needed making and not burning anything down, which turned out to be a significant fraction of what kingship actually required. He rode in quietly. No ceremony. He'd asked specifically for no ceremony because he was tired, and he had 47 men's families to write to, and he wasn't going to receive adulation first. Ghost walked beside him. He went to the throne room, not because he needed the throne, but because he needed to think, and thinking sometimes required the uncomfortable chair and the empty room and the specific acoustics of a space built for the long view. He sat down. He thought about what they'd found north of the wall, about the figure retreating, about what it meant that they'd met and fought and the enemy had pulled back. He thought about what came next, which was go back, prepare, understand what the figure was and what could end it. Build the alliance between the Watch and the realm that should have been built 100 years ago and wasn't because it was never urgent enough until it was too urgent. It was always going to come to this. He understood that now. The whole history of it, Rhaegar's prophecy, his mother's choice, Ned's lie, Robb's declaration. It had all been pointing at this. Not him, specifically. Not the great man theory of history where one person is the answer, but the configuration of it, the combination of what he was and who had built him and what they'd all done together. He was not the answer. He was one piece of it. The door opened. Robb came in. He looked at Jon in the throne and didn't say anything about it. He sat in a chair near the base of the throne dais and propped his boots on the step and looked comfortable in a way that would have horrified most of the lords. Sansa wants to talk to you about the Westerlands, lords, Robb said. Tomorrow. She'll have thoughts. She always has thoughts. Tomorrow. Ghost came and lay down across both their feet. Margaery's pregnant, Robb said. Jon went still. Maester confirmed it this morning. She wanted to tell you herself. But she also knew you'd come here first, so she... He stopped. She asked me to tell you. So you'd have a minute. Jon sat in the throne with the information and ghost across his feet and his brother sitting on the step below him. He thought about what it meant. What a child born in King's Landing to a Targaryen father and a Tyrell mother would inherit. What kind of world he was trying to build for that. "Right," he said finally. "Right," Robb agreed. Jon stood. He walked down from the throne. He stopped beside Robb and put his hand on his brother's shoulder for a moment. Robb put his hand over Jon's. "Go find your wife," Robb said. Jon went. Ghost stood and followed. What if Robb Stark crowned Jon Snow king? He put up a fight first. That matters. He didn't accept it with the grace of a man who had been waiting for his destiny to arrive. He shouted and walked out twice, and said no clearly enough that everyone in the tent heard it. Then he said yes. Because Robb was right, and because his father had died protecting something, and because the girls were in King's Landing, and because he was the most reliable person Robb had ever known, and the most reliable thing available was needed. He was bad at the ceremonies. He got better. He was good at the listening. He always had been. He held the North through a war, and the South through a negotiated surrender, and the realm through the first proper engagement with what lived beyond the wall. He didn't finish that last one. He wasn't going to finish it in one battle, or 1 year, or one ranging. He knew that now. He'd stopped looking for the moment it was over, and started looking for the next thing to do, which was the only honest relationship with this kind of work. The throne still hurt his back. He sat in it when he needed to, and got out of it when he could. Robb sat on the step below him most mornings, with a cup and a report, talking through the shape of things, arguing about the decisions that needed making. Ghost slept across both their feet. The North held. The realm held. And beyond the wall, in the dark of the retreating cold, something waited. Jon Snow was going to find it. That was not a destiny. That was just what came next. The Small Council. A Tuesday, 301 AC. On the Tuesday after Jon came back from the second ranging, the Small Council met at the usual hour and nobody sat in the right order. This was Arya's fault. She'd come to a council meeting for the first time, not as a member. She was 17 and had no title and no interest in titles, but as an observer, which Jon had allowed because the alternative was her finding out what they discussed by other means, and he preferred informed to uncontrolled. She'd sat in the wrong chair, not Sansa's chair. She'd avoided that with the specific precision of someone who is doing something deliberately and wants it to look accidental. But Lord Mormont's seat, which Lady Mormont was not currently occupying because Lady Mormont was in the north, and Arya had sat in it with needle across her lap and the expression of someone who had decided this was fine. Nobody asked her to move. Robb started the session. He went through the agenda: the Westerlands supply situation, the Night's Watch resupply, 3 petitions from lords that required council input, a question from the Iron Bank that Tyrion was going to handle and which Jon had been told about but did not need to manage personally. Jon sat at the head of the table and listened and occasionally said things, and mostly let the council run, which was the thing he'd learned in the first 6 months, that a good council runs itself, and the king's job is to be the person who makes the decision when the council can't agree, and to be listening well enough to make that decision correctly. Midway through the Iron Bank question, Tyrion was explaining something complicated about letters of credit that Jon was following approximately 60% of. Arya interrupted. She said, "The Iron Bank backed the wrong side in the war." Everyone looked at her. She said, "We won. They were backing Joffrey through the Lannister credit lines. That means they're in a bad position." She looked at Tyrion. "Tell them the new arrangement comes with a favorable rate, or we go to the Braavosi banking families directly. The Braavosi will deal." Tyrion looked at her with the specific expression he had when someone said something in a meeting that he'd been thinking himself and hadn't said yet. He said, Yes, that's correct. I was getting there. You were building up to it, Arya said. I don't have time for building up. Lady Arya, someone started. Not a lady. She said it without heat. Factual. Jon was looking at his cup. He kept his face neutral. He met Robb's eyes across the table, and Robb also had a very neutral face. Tyrion said to the council, ignoring the interruption with the practiced ease of someone who has been interrupted in councils for decades, Lady Arya's instinct is correct. I'll approach the Iron Bank with the framing she suggested. Sansa, who had been watching all of this with the expression of someone taking notes she will use later, said, she should come to the next trade negotiation. Arya looked at her. Sansa looked back. You read situations quickly. That's useful in a negotiation. A pause. Fine, Arya said. Fine, Sansa said. Jon moved to the next item on the agenda. After the meeting in the corridor outside, Robb fell into step beside him. Your council, Robb said. Yes. Is currently composed of your brother, 2 of your sisters, a former enemy, a woman from Bear Island who's been here for 6 months, and the Hand. That's accurate. People are going to say it looks like a family business. Jon considered this. It is a family business. Jon, the realm is a family business. It's always been a family business. The Targaryens ran it as a family business. The Baratheons ran it as a family business. He shrugged. At least mine are competent. Robb was quiet for a moment. Arya, he said. Yes. She's going to be difficult. She's already difficult. She's been difficult since she was 9. Jon looked at him. She's also right about the Iron Bank. Tyrion knew it. He was just being Tyrion about it. She sat in Lady Mormont's chair. Lady Mormont can tell her when she's back. She will. Then it'll be fine. Jon pushed open the door to his solar. I need to write to Margaery. She wants input on the Reach negotiations. Robb followed him in. You're really not worried about how any of that looks? I'm worried about getting things right. Jon sat down. If I get things right, how it looks is secondary. If I get things wrong, how it looked won't matter. He picked up a quill. The council works. That's what matters. Ghost padded in from somewhere and lay down under the desk. Robb sat across from him. You've gotten better at this, Robb said. Marginally. More than marginally. He looked at him. Father would be... Jon kept writing. After a moment, Robb stopped. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Jon already knew. And Robb knew. He already knew. And the knowing was the thing that sat between them always. The grief and the gratitude, and the shape of what Ned Stark had built in both of them, and what they were doing with it. They sat in the solar. Jon wrote. Robb drank his wine. Outside, King's Landing moved through its afternoon in the particular way it was learning to move, which was less frantic than before, and not yet comfortable, and still making its accommodation with whoever these northern people were, and what kind of city they were building. One thing at a time. That was the only way. One thing at a time. And then the next thing. And then the next. Until the work was done. Or you were. And either way, you'd done what you could with what you had. Jon had learned this from his father. Not either father. Both of them.